Is this thing on? It is on. We'll get started with the technical sessions here. I just want to thank everybody for coming. We've got a great turnout for KOGA's 79th annual meeting. If y'all were at the cocktail party last night, I was impressed how many people are here. And I really want to thank everybody, especially our exhibitors and our sponsors. It's the exhibitors and sponsors that really take the time and make this happen. We've got a good slate of technical talks that we'll be going through today. Maybe something special by this afternoon, we hope, with the panel discussions that'll be interesting and new and different for KOGA. Really want to thank Andrew and Astrid. Where'd Astrid? Anyway, they've done a great job of putting things together for us. Excuse me. So with having said that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew, and we'll get started with the first talks.
If our first group of panelists could come up and join us at the front, please. That's right, isn't it? And while they're getting in place, I just would like to reiterate what Rudy shared in terms of our appreciation for your attendance, our appreciation for your support of the association. This is the third annual meeting that I've been a part of, and walked into it and 3 years ago and was very impressed by the support and energy that surrounds this meeting, and is what ultimately makes this organization successful in our endeavors, whether it's putting together events like this so that the industry can get together and come together and talk about pressing issues and opportunities and concerns, or whether it's affecting the dialogue in public policy circles, primarily in Frankfurt. When you hear phrases like "couldn't do it without you," clearly when you're in the association business, that's certainly true. So Susan, do you and Kyle want to go ahead and come up? So I'll introduce our first panel. To Rudy's point, you guys want to just grab a seat. Another great program put together by the program committee, the member services committee. When I took this job, there was a discussion amongst the board of directors and those committees to really focus on enhancing the technical aspects of our programs. And I don't have a baseline to compare it to, but I certainly think that over the last 3 years, you're starting to see that, or have seen that commitment has been met, and we're certainly getting a good response from the membership in terms of our programming. And so with that, I'll handle the introductions of everyone, and then we'll just begin with the program. First, Susan Barber, Rubicon Geological Consulting. Over the last 14 years, Susan has been active in geological consulting in the oil and gas industries, with field operations experience, geosteering, and mud logging in the Appalachian and Permian Basin. Susan's research experience has historically been in the Appalachian Basin sedimentology, stratigraphy, paleobiology, and aspartic acid. Wow. Yeah, okay. This is what happens when a political science major finds himself in a position like this. You have a little trouble sometimes with some of the pronunciations of the technicalities of the business. But so prior to co-founding Rubicon Geological, Susan worked as a Geosteering manager, leading operations in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, and Texas, and has also taught as an assistant professor of geology at Western Carolina University and Colby College. She received her PhD degree in geology from Virginia Tech and an MS in geology at the University of Cincinnati. Kyle Gray is the Director of Information Technology at Rubicon Geological Consulting. He graduated from Morehead State University in July of 2011 with a bachelor's degree and art education. After graduation, he worked as a graphic designer in a local printing shop before starting his career as technology expert at RGC. During his employment, he's created several products for RGC that are run completely through Dropbox. With these programs, any employees at RGC can access these programs through their work, personal computer, regardless of location. His recent endeavors have led him to create RGC's own geosteering software, RigSteer. Currently in progress, Gray is still working to complete RigSteer, which is projected to be completed in the year 2015. And has that been completed?
It is in open beta right now, so anyone can test it and download it, and for all intents and purposes, it is available now.
It's still in the beta form.
Yeah, it's still in beta form,
Yep.
but it is available.
Mike Butcher attended the University of Kentucky, worked for 15 years for Ashland Exploration, 3 for Statoil, and the past 15 years for EQT. Managed Virginia construction, drilling completions for EQT as they drilled more than 1,500 wells in 8 years. Currently, Mike handles water operations for the Marcellus, Utica, and Permian operations. He's a member of SPE, served many years on the scholarship committee, and has also served on the Mountain Empire Community College Foundation Board, has memberships in VOGA as well as KOGA. And Ralph Bandy is a senior geologist with Nytis Exploration, LLC in Lexington, Kentucky. Ralph's role at Nytis includes petroleum exploration and geosteering horizontal wells in the company's Berea sandstone assets in eastern Kentucky. Before coming to Nytis, Ralph received his Master's of Science degree in geology from the University of Kentucky in 2012. His thesis is titled Geology of the Eau Claire Formation and Casaga Group in part of Kentucky, an analysis of their suitability as cap rocks for deeper CO2 sequestration. His research was conducted through the Kentucky Geological Survey, and funding was provided by grants from the Battelle Memorial Institute and the U.S. Department of Energy. Ralph holds a Bachelor of Science degrees in both geology and geography from East Tennessee State University. He worked as a student coal geologist for 2 consecutive summers at Penn Virginia Resource Partners while an undergraduate. So with our introductions out of the way, Susan, are you going to lead off with the panel? Okay.
Good morning. We wanted to open up today's panel discussion with a discussion of geosteering, and this is something that's probably familiar to many of you, but just in case this isn't something that perhaps everyone uses, first a definition, and then we wanted to talk about some of the methods and changes in geosteering over the years. Finally, some of the innovations and improvements that have been developed with technical geosteering or computerized geosteering, and finally an open panel discussion on not only the technology of late, but also how geosteering is used by an E&P company. So geosteering is pretty basic. What we typically think of it is intentional directional drilling in order to control a well. And the purpose of this is to use downhole logging equipment. So for example, we can get azimuth, inclination, possibly gamma data. And we use this to compare to a local known well, something that's possibly on the pad or maybe an offset well that's nearby. So you can do this in order to figure out where you are downhole in space. And the effort here is to keep the well bore within a known target. The purpose here would be possibly to avoid hazardous zones, to increase pay, particularly, possibly stay within a porous zone, something of that nature. So in the past, really all we had available was logs, and you can download these on websites. Possibly you have some from the area wells. These might be paper or digital, and for many companies, this is all that's available to them in terms of technology within a pad. And we can use these quite readily, and it requires few resources. So this is simple and easy. You see the downhole gamma that's coming through, and you can compare it to a local known well, figure out where you are in space. The problems with only using either paper or digital logs is that it's difficult to share this information. So if you are a geologist on site and you're operating your own well, that's fine and good. And for many companies, this is all that's needed. However, if your operations maybe get a little larger and you want to use a service company, or perhaps you have people working under you and they need to relate to you what's going on the well site, it can be quite difficult to explain where you are if you only have a paper copy of a well. So simply sharing information can be a little problematic. There are also changes in the character within wells. So many of you have probably looked at logs, and you can recognize areas where maybe you get an extra warm zone or cool zone. And explaining some of these factors or understanding some of these factors can be problematic. You can quite easily get confused on which peak you're on, for example, as you're drilling down through section. The other issue is that once you have the data coming in, MWD surveys, for example, you then have to calculate any parameters of the bedding that you wish to understand and know. So if you wanted to understand the bedding dip, that's a calculation that you have to make. If you want to project ahead of the bit to explain to your directional driller, where he needs to go, if perhaps your well plan is off, then that's another calculation. So these are all things that can be time consuming and things that you have to do constantly and on the fly. So it's a source of basically manual error or user operator error. So with the innovations with computerized geosteering, this simplifies a lot of these aspects. So that's what we wanted to focus on today. Not that paper or digital logs and using those alone is necessarily bad, but there are many things that have gone into the computerized programs that can make your life a little bit easier. So we wanted to talk a little bit about that and then lead into how companies are using geosteering. So particularly it's fast, easy, and affordable. First thing that I wanted to get into was data management. So for any of you that have been on a well site, you have some sort of WITS data coming in from the driller, and it can almost be a data overload. You have your survey data, you might have gamma data, ROP, things like that, and you have to manage all of that in order to figure out what's going on the well site. And most people use spreadsheets or some other sort of plotting program in order to do this, but it's quite a lot to handle. So with computerized geosteering, one of the things that you will see as a benefit is that it's a quick way to manage the data. Basically, you can input the data into sort of the arrows pointing at a paste portion where you can paste in surveys, or you can input an LAS file, and computerized programs will manage all of this data feed for you and plot it for you, so you can see an instant graphical representation of what's going on the drill site. So again, it's quicker, easier data management. With this, once you get the data in, you often have a correlation that you can make. This is pretty quick for most software applications. You can instantly get information on where you are with respect to a target zone or with respect to a well plan. So again, this is something if you're wanting to assess, did we make it to the target we're trying to reach? Or perhaps if the well plan is off, how far off are we? These are measurements that, again, if you did not have access to a computer system or something built in, could be quite time consuming and problematic. With computerized geosteering, this is a quick and simple process. You don't have to worry about the calculation errors. For many folks we've worked with in the past from the consulting side, they only have paper logs, and when they hand that to us, one of the issues with most software packages is then you have to figure out how to get that information into the program. Some of the larger packages, software packages for geosteering, ours included, will have a digitizing program or a way that you can digitize your logs and input them in, sort of button click access to paper logs or even a picture of a log. So that's something that's handy. You don't have to worry about what do I do with this giant log, just digitize it in. In terms of the data, once you actually get the data in place within the computer program, you can start to explore the LWD feeds, the gamma data, for example. And Kyle, did you want to? And Kyle is going to talk about various portions of what we do and how we manage the data.
So once you have your data digitized and you have all the information in the computer software, there's lots of features that make it a whole lot easier to maintain and manage. For instance, the pan features on a computer software will let you see where your drill is in relationship to the bed or the target zone, where it has been, and also where it will be potentially. Another thing that is handy with computer software is that it will allow you to zoom in on a selected area to let you better see a representation of where the drill is. Some higher end softwares will also include a zoom feature such as Brigsteer, where you can zoom in intelligently with a mouse position, or you can zoom in on either axes. Another thing that is very handy for computerized software is a location tool. So with a simple mouse over of your target zone, you can see exactly what portion of gamma relates to that area. And this is very beneficial because whenever you're steering a well, you want to stay in the target zone. And that means that the more you stay in the target zone, the more gamma you have built up in that area, and it can be very difficult to decipher what gamma is the gamma that you are actually steering with. Something else that programs offer is a curve smoothing, which will take gamma and it will take a lot of the noise and mess out of the file itself and make it a whole lot easier to maintain and steer. Now, there are also other benefits to using programs as opposed to paper logs. For instance, editing gamma is extremely easy in geosteering software. Most geosteering softwares will also allow you a active dip calculator, which will take the dip and will move it as you scale, fault, or shift the gamma. And that will show you an in-time real edit of the beds that you're moving. Most geosteering software edits gamma in something called blocks. And what that is a block is a section of gamma that you are editing right then. And that can get a little messy from time to time because you have to match up those blocks to make a smooth transition. Other software like Brigsteer will use a fluid graphing, so you will not have any blocks. It is one solid graph that graphs all your gamma at one time, so you don't have to worry about matching up the ends of different blocks. Something else that's very handy with computer software is that you can either hide selected gamma or you can just completely remove that interpretation altogether. For instance, on the right-hand side, you can see an animation where the user picks a starting point and an end point, and all the points in between get bridged together, and that interpretation gets nullified. The projection of the project is also a very handy feature. As Susan mentioned, the directional driller will need something like this so they can see or predict where the bed is going to be and what the bed is going to do, so they can readjust their drilling bit so they can get into the target zone. Now, using computerized geosteering, it is a lot easier to do many of the complicated tasks that you find with paper logs. For instance, if you decide to change the color of an area or change the location of a top, all those are extremely easy to do. You can even change the horizon of the bed that you want to edit. It's usually just a simple click, change the color, change the name, change the location, change the depth. It's very simple, and it will change it for you automatically. Another thing that is very nice in programming is that if you want to change your view, it's very simple to do that. You can switch between total vertical depth, measure depth, vertical section, or you can view it in cross-sectional views. And publishing your well data is also very simple. Most programs will allow you to export your well data and compress it down into a file format. For instance, Brigsteer will compress it down into an Excel document, And all you have to do is just attach that Excel document to an email, send it to whoever you want to send it to. It will also compress down your raw text data. So this is your surveys and everything else that you are getting in. So you can either compress that down, send it through an Excel document, or you can access this right on the main panel with most geosteering software, copy and paste it in whatever you want to. And I'm going to give back to Susan.
So many of these features are enhancements over using paper logs alone, but the idea here is to be able to steer a successful well. And one of the things that we often do is compare to regional wells. This, again, I mentioned earlier, could be a simple vertical well that's on the pad. It could be something that may be a mile away. It depends on the regional well control. But when you start to compare multiple wells, for anyone that's dealt with either paper logs or computerized geosteering, you start to end up with quite a bit of things that you need to control and keep in mind, and you're constantly panning between screens. This is somewhat easier, especially if you're trying to mentally keep track, maybe on a gamma file that's given from the MWD hand. You're constantly looking at those peaks coming through and trying to keep track of where you are in space. With computerized geosteering, you can keep these files updated. So for example, in the red zone, you can see 10 different options there that you could make either 10 different wells active at once if you are a geologist looking at different wells in a region, or possibly one well, but you have multiple interpretations. Was the dip at an 89 or 89.5? Well, let's run them both and watch and see what comes ahead in the gamma. So this is simplified with a computer. You also, with some programs, are able to use grid data, mini local offsets, for example. Many companies will have someone in hand with GIS, for example, making these grid maps and contour maps. Some programs, including this, will do this for you. So it's a handy feature where if you have any local offsets, you can create a horizon, possibly a horizon of your target, and this is what we build our well model from. And as the surveys come in, as you update your correlation, then these will snap into place and update the topography for you so that you can make intelligent steering decisions as you drill. So rather than having to wait and feed this to another engineer, you can do this for yourself as you're geosteering. In terms of production, this is the main idea of geosteering. Why do we want to do this anyway? Why would we add this expense? There are many things, as mentioned earlier, that you might want to do and why you might want to use geosteering. Just a few examples here of sort of a plethora of things that you might want to do. Perhaps you're using it solely for mapping. You want to know something that will help you with your completions. Possibly you're wanting to avoid hazards. You know that there is a fault in the area, you have a hard line, and you're wanting to make sure you're staying away from certain boundaries. It could be as simple as we have a porous zone we're wanting to stay in, and we're wanting to keep the drill bit in that target for a reason, or there's an oil-water boundary or something of that nature. So all of these enhancements will allow you, with computerized geosteering, to do this in real time as the data is coming in and do it more efficiently than using logs alone. So that's why we wanted to show you some of the improvements and enhancements that have come about over the past few years. So just in summary, quicker and easier data management. You can more efficiently explore the LWD data, particularly in a lateral. If you are staying within a particular region, and if you've looked at logs, you'll see the gamma files can look very confusing, and you're trying to figure out little discrepancies between whether you're at 400 or 420, and is that meaningful in terms of the gamma, or is it noise? It's one of those things that can be quite difficult if you're looking at logs alone, but if you have this fed into a program that allows you to map it against an offset log, then you can visually look at the data, play with the data, manage it, and see if the changes that you're seeing coming through are significant or not. Communication is greatly enhanced. You can make cross-sections, you can export this data, send it to someone, share it with someone, communicate with your DD, communicate with the guys in the office. There are so many enhancements with digital data that you're not having to sit down and draw this out by hand or try to visualize what's going on. Some of you are able to do that, others aren't. So it's easier to do this with a computer. Also, with comparing to regional wells, the ability to pull in multiple wells at once and look at your surface and have that updated as you drill is a wonderful improvement for keeping you within the target. And that all increases production. So we have the panel.
Good morning. My name is Ralph Bandy. I'm a geologist with Nytis. Let's see. Brandon is my clicker. Do what now? Clicker's not working. Oh, okay. I'd like to talk a little bit today about how beneficial geosteering has been to Nytis and how we geosteer at Nytis. So what I'll be talking about, a couple questions to answer are, first, what is geosteering? Just a quick recap. Then, like I said, how beneficial is geosteering to Nytis, and how do we utilize geosteering with Nytis? So what is it? It's the intentional directional control of a well based on the results of downhole logging measurements. Most of the time we do this to keep ourselves in the pay zone. And why would we want to do that? Well, we want to do that so we can maximize economic production. And in the case of the Berea and the Marcellus, without geosteering, we wouldn't have those opportunities at all. Remember, take-home message for the day, that hole drilled out of zone is wasted hole and wasted money. Very important. Can you really just say, if you're out of zone, we'll just frack into it? Well, do you really know that you're just going to frack into it? And you can't really say that. Most of our geosteering, actually almost all of it's done in the Berea sandstone in eastern Kentucky. It's a very technical reservoir, so geosteering is integral to the success of our wells. It's very heterogeneous. There's a picture of it there, an outcrop on the right. That was taken on a KGS field trip near Moorhead, Kentucky. It's composed of hard sandstones, which is where the oil is, interbedded with siltstones and shales. It has very tight porosity in the sands, so your completion technique, in our case fracking, is very important. And the sweet spot, or the zone where the oil is located, can be very thin. This is a E-log of the Berea. I've highlighted the sandstones, and they're in yellow. The shales and siltstones are in the darker color there. I've got the pay zone right there, about 10 feet thick. So if I have a 10-foot pay zone, I'm going to try to keep the drill on a 5-foot window. So precision is very important. My boss, who's an engineer, saw this yesterday, and he said, boy, just like a geologist put himself at the center of the universe, and there's not an engineer in sight, but the engineers are there. They're in the management team. My other boss, who's a geologist, loved it. So what this is a map of my workflow. When I'm geosteering a well, all I'm doing is collecting data. I'm continuously collecting data. I'm looking at Payson. If you're not familiar with Payson, it's a website I can go to from anywhere in the world. I can log in as long as I have internet access, and I can see the vital signs of that well. I can see heartbeat, blood pressure. I can see ROP. I can see the gamma ray. I can see the weight on bit. All kinds of useful information. I'm also constantly talking to my mud logger. I want to know what the samples look like. Are we in good fluorescence? Are we in good sandstone? And I can make adjustments accordingly. I'm also talking to MWD continuously. I want to know, how's the MWD, how's the gamma ray looking, what kind of tool are we using? We're using a 360, we're using a focus gamma, that matters. So I'm taking all that data, taking the gamma ray logs, mud logging information, and the info from Payson, and I'm plugging this into our software model. We have our own software we've developed in-house. Works very well for us. It was easy to create. It's simple to use, and it's very adaptable depending on our situation. And I'm also all the time talking to the directional driller. I want to know information from him too. You know, how does it feel? Is it wanting to kick up on you, kick down on you, walk left or right? So I'll take all this information, plug it in my model, and it helps me to visualize what's going on downhole. And then I can take that data, and then I can effectively instruct the directional driller to keep us in the pay zone. And then I can also receive data from my management team, keep the company man up to date on what's going on, and go from there. So when we begin to geosteer a well, the first thing I'm going to do is I need a real solid structure map. I need this map to be as detailed as possible. 3-point problem is great, but if you've got 20 wells to work with, 20 points, that's even better. So as the folks were saying a little bit ago, sometimes well control can be a bit sparse, but the more you have, the better. So if I have this well here, this is my well path that I plan on drilling. Here's one E-log with this diamond. Here's another E-log. In an ideal situation, you've got one at the beginning and one at the end. I'm going to try to establish my dip as precisely as possible based on my structure map. These are those same wells you just saw on the map in cross-section, and you can see I've tried to map out my pay zone. I've tried to map out the different lobes within the Berea as precisely as possible. And these wells are about almost 7,000 feet apart. It's a pretty good distance. So it's very important to be as precise as possible. This is the same cross-section hung stratigraphically, so meaning the top of the Berea, which is right here, is level. Another thing you have to be careful with, and it's very important to make sure that you account for appropriately, is your pay zone may move within the Berea. So you're not only trying to map the Berea, but you're trying to make sure that your pay zone, you need to understand how that works as well. So it can thin on you, it can thicken on you, it can rise and fall as you drill within the Berea itself. It's very important. Sometimes it can be very challenging to accommodate for that. So geosteering for us really begins at kickoff. So our kickoff point is going to be when we begin to take the well from vertical to horizontal, and our software is going to help us calculate our curve. We're going to watch the well continuously as we go down. We like to be on site when we land the curve. That's the most crucial time. We have to make sure we get into the pay, find the pay, and stay in the pay as we drill. And then once we've landed appropriately and we're flying right, then our software helps us to calculate dip to stay in the zone to TD. So this is Payson, as I was talking about a little bit before. I can log into Payson from anywhere, and I'm going to see a screen that looks similar to this. I'm going to see, they weren't drilling at the moment when I took this snapshot, but I can see gamma ray, I can see ROP, I can see weight on bit, hook load, I can see my gas. These are all very important pieces of data that I can use to help me steer. Mud log is very important. This is like my report card. So I can show this to my management team. It's a real quick, overall concise update of how we're doing. You know, do we have good samples? Do we have good fluorescence? Do we have good lithology, good sandstone, which is where the oil is? Very, very important. And then the gamma ray log. So I'm going to talk to my NWD. He sends me updates very frequently. And I have two sides to my gamma ray log. I've got a measure depth side and a TVD side. I can use the TVD side to help me land. You can see this correlates pretty well with one of my nearby well control points. And here's my pay zone right here. This particular well tells me that, you know, even though the well is pretty close to where our landing point is, I've got this extra little crux thrown in here, so my pay zone is actually going to be a little lower. This is equivalent to this right here. And if you get out of zone, it can take quite a while to get back in, so it's important to be on your toes and be proactive. This is a well path diagram. This is another thing our software does. It helps us to project out and visualize what's going on downhole. So I can tell in 3D space on this diagram. Basically, I can tell, you know, where are we